Morning, everyone. Good morning. My name is Michael Dougherty. I'm the district attorney for Boulder. I'll tell you briefly what it means to be a district attorney and what we do at the district attorney's office. But I'm really excited to speak with you today and to answer any questions you have about the criminal justice system, my background, career choices, whatever it is you want to ask me. You should feel free to ask me anything you want. Okay? So I have the honor of being the district attorney for Boulder County, which means I'm the head of the office that's responsible for investigating and prosecuting criminal offenses committed within Boulder. So if someone shoplifts, trespasses, drives too fast, is sexually assaulted, or is killed, all those cases come to the district attorney's office. If there's state law violations, and the district attorney's office is responsible for doing justice in each case. And that means doing the right thing. So our mission is not to rack up convictions like notches in a gun belt, but rather to try to make sure we reach the right outcome in every case. Not that we're perfect and not that the system doesn't make mistakes, but that's our mission every day we get to work. I love the job that I have, and I'll tell you more about it. But one thing I really want you to remember from today's discussion, probably the most important thing I'm going to say to you, is to find a job that you love. I'm not here to sell you on being a prosecutor. I could try, because I love my work. But I'm here to just encourage you as you hit crossroads that's quickly approaching when you finish school, to find something that you feel passionate about, to find something that has real meaning to you. Because we all know people who come home from work unhappy every day, right? You've all seen people who come home unhappy every day from work and complain about work every day. That can't be you. There are too many great things to do in the world, and the world needs great people like you to affect real meaningful change and to make a difference. So whatever field you want to go into, just make sure it's something that you love doing, you feel passionate about. So when I went to college, I was thinking I'd become a teacher or a counselor. I went to community college for 2 years, and then went on to graduate my bachelor degree. Ultimately, I went to law school at Boston University, and I went to law school knowing I wanted to go into public service, knowing that I wanted to make a difference in the community. And during law school, I fell in love with criminal law and thought I was going to be a public defender, representing people who were too poor to afford counsel. But ultimately I had a professor, who to this day is a mentor and friend of mine, who convinced me that if I found the right district attorney's office to work in, that the mission of doing justice is something I'd find really fulfilling. And he was absolutely right. And I spent the first 12 years at the Manhattan DA's office in New York City. I specialized in sex crimes and homicides. I just rose up through the ranks in the office. And in 2009, I was recruited to start a justice review project here in Colorado. Project that was grant funded and was dedicated to using DNA analysis to find out if anybody had been wrongfully convicted in the state of Colorado. So my family and I moved out here for that job opportunity. We've been in Boulder ever since. That project led to, for example, the exoneration of Robert Dewey. Mr. Dewey had been convicted of murder in Grand Junction and served 18 years for murder he truly did not commit. And the DNA analysis that we helped bring about not only proved that he was completely innocent, but allowed us to successfully identify, arrest, and prosecute the actual killer who's now in state prison. We then went to the legislature, along with others, and helped push for legislation that Colorado will provide funding for anybody who's wrongfully convicted and released from prison. They receive funding every year from the state to try to help them get back on their feet. They also receive health benefits, and if they want to go back to school, tuition. We can talk more about that case if you want. But no greater honor in my career than last year when I was elected district attorney in Boulder. So it's an elected position, but it's not a political position, meaning I have to do what's right in the case, regardless of whether there's political pressure or community pressure for any particular outcome. I have to focus on what the right thing to do is. I'm very passionate about criminal justice reform. We've done a lot in Boulder, and I think it's a really exciting time for criminal justice reform because we've seen a lot of changes nationwide. So I'm going to touch on those, and then we can start to talk about communication and dealing with the media and some of the questions you may have. But one of the couple things we've been doing on criminal justice reform, it's all geared towards making sure that we reduce how often people are coming into the criminal justice system. So what do you think are the two major things that we struggle with in our community that leads to people getting in the criminal justice system? What are the two things?
I would say drugs.
Drugs, you're absolutely right. So substance abuse. You're 100% correct, and I'll give you some data to support that. First, in the Department of Corrections, which is the state prison system here in Colorado, there are currently 20,000 inmates. 80% of them have substance abuse issues. 80%. Not that they're there for drug cases necessarily, but 80% report, self-report, as having substance abuse issues. As a state, Colorado ranks 48th in the nation for substance abuse treatment being available in the community. 48th. So we're right near the bottom in terms of people who need treatment for addiction, being able to find treatment in the community. So if you come from a wealthy family, find someone to treat addiction issues. But if you're not, you're going to struggle to find someone in Colorado who's going to be able to treat addiction issues. There's a lot of great people doing that work, but we need more funding from the state. And I looked at, for example, not only is it the right thing to do and the compassionate thing to do to help people with drug addiction, but it's something we should all have a vested interest in. Because there are times where people who are in the throes of addiction will commit other offenses to feed the addiction. In other words, they'll take a package off your porch. They'll steal my bike. They'll commit identity theft. Because they're trying to get money to buy drugs because they're struggling with the addiction. So drug addiction, substance abuse is one of the top two. What's the other one that we struggle with?
Violence.
So violence, we have violent acts, but you're absolutely right. We've had an increase in violent crime over the last 5 years here in Colorado. So there's been an increase in the rate of felony filings, felony cases being filed here in Colorado over the last 5 years. But what sometimes drives violent crime, in addition to substance abuse?
Poverty.
Poverty, okay.
Sometimes mental health.
Mental health. So mental health is the other one I put in the top two. I think poverty is right there as well. And I will say, just to back up a step, one of the things that I love about working in the criminal justice system, one of the challenging things about it, is that whatever we have wrong in our country and our community flows into the criminal justice system in one form or another. So if we have substance abuse issues, mental health issues, poverty, racism, lack of education, you see those things in so many cases in the criminal justice system. But mental health I put at the top two. So mental health issues, Department of Corrections, the 20,000 inmates that I mentioned, 40% have mental health issues currently. And it's really hard to find mental health treatment in a state where we rank 43rd in the nation. So I'm going to take one more question and then touch on some of the things we've done to try to lower the rate of reoffense. Because the rate of reoffense in Colorado for people coming out of state prison. So if you picture in your mind the gates of a state prison opening this morning and 10 people walking out, 5 are back within 3 years. 5. That's a 50% what I would call failure rate. If half your class failed at the end of the year, the school would probably have to change something, right? So picture half the class being released from state prison only to be back within 3 years. We rank 43rd in the nation in that category. 43rd. The nationwide average is 32% recidivism rate. So if we went from 48 just down to, 50% down to 32%, think about how many people we'd save from ever being victimized in the first place, the offenders going back to prison, the taxpayers, and the community members.
Well, just with mental health, I just didn't know if like it's a broad, like is it like only diagnosed? I know there's different levels.
So
is it, I just didn't know if like that was too, sometimes that's tough for me. I personally am bipolar. Okay. But sometimes being like grouped and, with certain is difficult.
No, you're absolutely right. So the question is, are there particular mental health issues that show themselves in the criminal justice system? Because there are a lot of people in the world, of course, who have what I would call low-level mental health issues, who are being treated and taking care of themselves, and certainly not being involved in the criminal justice system. So I'd say it's Axis 1 disorders. They're classified as Axis 1 disorders, where people have particularly heightened levels of paranoid schizophrenia, for example, or other high-level mental health disorders where they're really struggling, particularly if they're not on medication, where they can end up in the criminal justice system. So I'll give you an example of this. There's a guy I met at the homeless shelter in South Boulder. His name's Brent. Brent told me that he has a mental health disorder that he struggles with, and when he's not on his medication, he gets himself in trouble. He's been arrested 35 times in the last 5 years. all low-level offenses. So think about him being arrested, brought to the jail, brought to the courthouse, having a public defender assigned, a prosecutor from my office assigned to the case, returning to court, the case being prosecuted, and him being sentenced. You could take all that money and take it back to here at the start and give Brent some mental health treatment so that he's not arrested a 40th time or a 45th time. I think that's a much smarter way of us doing things. And that's why I'm so passionate about criminal justice reform. So we have a diversion program in my office, a restorative justice and diversion program, where we look at adults and juveniles for felony and misdemeanor conduct. We try to divert them out of the criminal justice system. So I'll give you an example if you're not familiar with the criminal justice system. Let's say you have a 21-year-old guy who smashes the window of a bar. He could be prosecuted and end up with a criminal conviction that he'd have to report when he applies for school or job or housing. Or we could divert him out of the system and have him apologize to the victims, make restitution to the bar, and perhaps get treatment if he needs it. So we do that with as many cases as we can. And we have a 92% success rate with diversion. So 92% of the offenders who go into our diversion program successfully complete, and then the case is dismissed. We also just started the first mental health pre-file diversion program in the state. So for people who are booked into the Boulder County Jail, if it's found that they have a mental health disorder and they're arrested on a low-level offense, we divert them out of the jail. We do not charge them with a crime. And they get mental health treatment in the community funded by the state. We were awarded that as a pilot project.
What is the low level? What is that?
So low level will be any misdemeanor not involving a victim. So not a domestic violence case, not a, what's called unlawful sexual contact case, but other cases where there's no victim of a particular offense and it's a low level crime. We started a Fresh Start program. It's the first time it's been done in the state of Colorado, where people who failed to show for court. So if someone fails to show for court, the court issues a warrant for their arrest. These are people who are out in the community right now, so they're at work today, hoping they don't get stopped by the police for a traffic violation, or get stopped on the street, or that they're a witness to a crime and get questioned by the police, because if that warrant exists, they're going to be taken to the jail and held overnight. And think about if right now you were taken to the jail. Think about if wherever you were supposed to be next, you don't show up because you're in the jail. What happens to your classes, your job, your kids, your car? So that has an extreme impact on people. So we started Fresh Start, which is on a Saturday in November and a Saturday in April. We allow people to come to the courthouse, no appointments required. They will not be arrested. They clear the warrant, and they can either resolve the case or put the case on for another court date. But to try to give them, in essence, a fresh start.
They obviously have to be residents of Boulder.
They have to have a warrant out of Boulder,
Okay.
yes, so it has to be a Boulder case.
Sure, okay.
That's a great question. So we only have jurisdiction over Boulder cases, but we've had people show up on Weld County warrants, for example. We do not arrest them. We promise the community, and we promise the offenders, no one will be arrested at Fresh Start. So we have people who show up and they don't have a warrant that we can resolve, we let them go. We give them instructions on where to go and how to clear the warrant. We encourage them to do so, and they don't get arrested. I want to see us reduce the prison population in Colorado. I want to see us eliminate private prisons in the state of Colorado. We should not have any private for-profit prisons. We have 3 in the state of Colorado. They hold 20% of our offenders. They operate at a profit, which means if you're making money at a prison facility, you have less incentive to put the money into rehabilitation. So I want to see us eliminate private prisons in the state of Colorado. And what drives me is that we all struggle, we all stumble in our lives, and so many people who go through the justice system have made a mistake. And as much as we can, we should be pushing those people to get back on the right track and not cycle in and out of the jail over and over and over again. That's a failed cycle for the taxpayers, the community, and especially the offenders. So what would you like to know about my background? What would you like to know about the office, what we do, before I start talking about what you might want to be aware of if you go into media and you're dealing with criminal cases? Yes,
So I
sir.
got a question right off the bat. You said you served in New York for 12 years, right?
12 years, yeah.
Were you there when 9/11 happened?
Yes.
And what was that like? If you could summarize it
Sure.
from personal experience.
Good question.
So it was obviously terrible. So I'll tell you the story because it might be of interest to you. Because it also, yeah, I'll tell you the story. It still impacts me, so if I'm not planning to talk about it, like when you just asked, I'm glad you asked, but it takes me a second to get reoriented.
Yeah, I apologize.
No, it's okay. I'm glad you asked. So on 9/11, it was a Tuesday morning, I had gone to work and I was about to do an opening statement in a robbery trial. These elderly Chinese couple who lived in Chinatown, which is actually right near the DA's office, had been the victim of a violent robbery in an elevator in their home. And the case was going to trial, and I was getting ready to do my opening statement. So I'm sitting at my desk in the DA's office, which is in downtown Manhattan, so not that far from the World Trade Center. And I heard the first plane hit, and you could hear it clearly. And I actually looked out the window, and I couldn't see that area, that part of the city from where the window was, because it was blocked by the next building. But it was clearly, an incredibly loud sound. And then a friend of mine called from outside to say a plane just hit one of the towers. And then soon after the second plane hit, and much like the rest of the country, we realized it was not an accident, the first plane. So the trial did not start that day. And I ended up I was living in Brooklyn at the time, and it was just a long journey getting back to Brooklyn ultimately. And obviously a horrific day for all of us, all across the country. Thankfully, my family and my friends were not directly impacted by it. But there were a couple police officers I knew who had died on 9/11. My aunt's brother died there. So there was, the impact was really felt. But what I'll share with you is a couple things. First, in the day or two after 9/11, there were people who were trying to go into a shopping mall beneath the World Trade Center and steal from the shopping mall. They used to have a shopping mall complex down there. It's actually where I did my last minute Christmas shopping every year. I'd go there Christmas Eve and run around the mall and get the stuff that I needed for my family. So some people went down there to loot. And there was a guy, David, who went down there. And I'm not sure if he went down there to loot or if he had low-level mental health issues, because he did from his past. But when he was coming out of the rubble, he was spotted by a construction worker. He said, what are you doing? Where are you coming from? And David said, I just found 3 people alive down in this hole. And people started chanting USA. And to me, that kind of captures the emotions of the moment. Is there anything I could say to you right now that would cause this class to erupt with a chant of USA, right? Think about what was going on for people at the time. And these firefighters went into the hole without taking any precautions. Thankfully, they were okay. But they quickly realized that David had made it up, that it was a hoax. There were no survivors in there. So he was charged with reckless endangerment, and I ended up handling that case from the very start all the way through to the trial. It was an extremely difficult case for everybody involved, including the 3 firefighters who went into the hole. They were 3 of the 9 from their firehouse who survived 9/11. 11 of their colleagues were killed. So having to come down to the district attorney's office and prepare for the trial was really difficult for them. And what was really something that I'll always remember too is there's a lot I'll remember, but the impact on the office and on all the people. I think this is really important for all of us in our lives, but especially when you have a job where you deal with a lot of responsibility. We have a lot of responsibility and a lot of power. I don't feel that way when I can't find a working pen in my office, but we actually have a lot of authority over what happens in people's lives. It's part of what's meaningful about the job, but it should never be forgotten. So after 9/11, all of downtown Manhattan was secured for months. So it wasn't just that day. But for months, when I would go to work, I'd have to check in at a National Guard station where they'd have soldiers with machine guns. And I'd have to check in to show my ID to get to my office. The smell and the smoke and the rescue efforts and the recovery efforts just went on for so long. And it definitely had an impact on people in the office. And it's something to always remember that we're impacted by the personal crises we face, but also by the crises we have as a country. And it can impact judgment too. So it's a sobering thing to think about, but I'm reminded of, I have a great friend of mine at the time, and she was a prosecutor in the office, and I had come to work that morning, this was about 3 or 4 weeks after the attack, and I said, I was talking to Bashir, this guy who worked at the coffee cart outside, and I said, I was talking to Bashir this morning, and he told me business is down since the attacks. Why would business be down? And my friend, he was a great person. Well, because he's a terrorist, that's why. What are you talking about? He's the coffee cart guy. He's like, great, what do you, she's like, I heard he wasn't here on 9/11. Like, okay, crazy. Well, I bought my coffee from him on 9/11. He was selling, what do you think, the coffee cart was part of the conspiracy? I mean, what's wrong with you? But it impacted all of us. That's kind of a really offensive, crazy example, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it impacts everybody. In fact, when I tried that, when people ask me most difficult case I've had, most difficult case I've tried, in some ways it was the case involving the guy who falsely claimed to have found survivors. That was a hard case. And that went to trial. You know what case was actually somewhat harder for me emotionally? Was the elderly Chinese couple that had been robbed. Because that was delayed and then it was rescheduled after people were able to start coming to the courthouse again. And 3 of the jurors refused to come back downtown, so we had to pick a whole new jury and start the whole process over again. And in some ways I think about that trial as being one of the most difficult I had just because of all the emotional baggage from everybody involved. I mean, that day, 9/11, I had the Chinese couple in my office. The interpreter wasn't there yet. They didn't speak English, and I don't speak Mandarin. So they were sitting there. And they saw people in my office running around and starting to cry. And I didn't know how to communicate to them what was going on. So I drew a picture of the Twin Towers, and then I crossed it all out. And otherwise, man, they were like horrified, and they realized what was happening. So extremely difficult would be the answer, but I took some life lessons from it too. In terms of A, appreciating this gift of life that I have, and B, reminding myself that in moments of crisis, when my dad passed or my mom got sick, your judgment is impacted at those times. So to always be on guard against, thinking things or doing things that might be impacted by some crisis.
Thank you.
Sure.
Affect your mental issue, did it affect your mental at all, like on your job, on your daily basis, or
Did 9/11?
yes, after that? If you have ever had any mental issues after 9/11?
We're getting deep here. Yeah. No, it's okay. I'm glad you asked. In all seriousness, no. I mean, other than what I said. So I mean, I don't. One thing that we didn't do well in that office was we didn't provide counseling for staff. There was no counseling or anything. And I think now, if it happened, we're much more aware of post-traumatic stress. And I think there probably would have been group counseling available, and I think that should happen. That didn't happen back then for me, but I don't think I was affected mentally beyond what I've already shared with you. It was an extremely difficult time, and I think it affected everybody in the country. But I think we figure out ways to deal with trauma and difficulties in our lives, and we work through that.
I was also in New York then, and I know that many of the people that I know on a day-to-day basis who had never experienced depression before in their lives found themselves with this strange thing that they figured out later was depression shortly after 9/11. It did affect a lot of people in ways that you wouldn't expect. People who weren't, I wasn't as close to it as Michael. I lived out on Long Island, but people all over the country were really were traumatized by it.
And I'll tell you actually something it sounds strange, but from times of trauma in our lives, from times of difficulty, sometimes we learn from those things and we actually live positive lives. So one of the things that happened after 9/11, and this would be a more positive note for us, right? One of the things that happened was that I realized I had a good life, things were going well, work was going well, but that I could have a great life if I just doubled down on everything. If I was more thoughtful about who I was dating, if I worked even harder than I was already working, which was incredibly hard, but if I just went all out on work. I don't think it's a coincidence that on September 11th, I was casually dating someone and doing fine in my job, and a year later I was engaged to be married to a wonderful woman who's now the mother of our twins, and I was one of the youngest supervisors in the Manhattan DA's office a year later. So from that reminder of how precious life is was just a commitment to myself that I'm going to go all out. I'm going to do everything I can to enjoy life, to cherish life, and to make this life meaningful. Not that I'm not pretending I'm perfect, I'm not, but I mean just to give it everything I got. Okay. What other questions about being a prosecutor, a district attorney's office? Yes?
You mentioned that one of your colleagues, you said,
whole conspiracy like the coffee cart guy. What steps do you take to keep things more politically correct in the courtroom?
Well, first of all, you would never want someone having those thoughts. I would never allow someone who's a racist to work in my office. And we are really careful about who we hire and who we bring into the DA's office because we have tremendous responsibility, including we do what's called implicit bias training, where we recognize that not every bias that people have are necessarily on the conscious level, some of it's subconscious. So we just brought in an expert to teach all of our staff. It was a mandatory training for implicit bias. So to me, it's not about being, I respect your question, but it's not about being politically correct. It's first of all making sure that you have people in the office who are fair and open-minded and committed to doing the right thing. When it comes to court, you fight very hard for your cases. So for example, I had a murder trial in February, I have a couple sex assault trials coming up. And it's obeying the rule of law, obeying the rules of evidence, but also making sure that you always remember the offender is a human being too, that he or she has done good things in their life, that they have loved ones who are often in the courtroom, and doing our best to prove the case without making it personal.
Can the public, knowing about a case, ever negatively impact it, or positively impact it? How do you determine whether or not this should be released or this should be released?
That's a great question. So why don't we take a look at what I passed out to you here, and that'll be the introduction to how we answer that question. Did everybody get the handout? Okay. So there's a couple of ethical rules about what prosecutors can share with the public. I'm not going to ask you to read all that. Rather, what I've also done is on the last page, there's a summary guide. You can just turn to that last page. Maybe the ethical rules. I'll give you a couple explications. The ethical rules are legal requirements that we all have to follow as prosecutors. These are from the Colorado Rules of Professional Conduct for all attorneys. And then there are what are called special responsibilities for prosecutors. That's the legal title, special responsibilities. That final sheet is kind of a cheat sheet that captures the basic essence of what's in the ethical rules. So that overview highlights what prosecutors can and cannot say. And it's really important because your question's a great one. Your question highlights that we have an impact on how the public views a case. And the public also gets information from other sources as well. But prosecutors have a duty to limit how much information they hear from the prosecutor. So I'm not allowed to, for example, we're currently prosecuting 2 sheriff's deputies who are charged with conduct that resulted in the death of someone who was in their custody. That case is currently pending and it's set for trial in April. When I mention that case to you, I am ethically bound to say they are presumed innocent, they remain innocent until and unless they're proven guilty, and I will not tell you in this setting or in any setting any of the evidence that I have against them, because that would be in that right-hand column there. I can't start to say, oh, they're definitely this or definitely that because we have this piece of evidence. And I'll make it a hypothetical. Let's say we have a sex assault case. I can't tell you, I have a sex assault case that started tomorrow, guy's definitely guilty. We got the confession, we got the DNA, he's certainly the one who did it. That might be true. I'm not allowed to say it because it might prejudice the jury pool against that individual before the trial even starts. So the jury will, the public still hears information from other sources, but it shouldn't be from the prosecutor. We're allowed to say the things that are on the left side of that sheet. So we'll say, for example, that the person's been arrested, that he or she's been charged, here's the sentence they face, that we don't believe there's anyone else responsible, or we're requesting further help in the investigation. So there was a stabbing in Boulder yesterday where the police are asking for information from witnesses. We'll put that out on Facebook. But we'll be clear to say anyone who's charged is innocent until proven guilty and so on. But you can call this information because that's on that left-hand side. So we're allowed to do that. But I can't say when the person, let's assume the person's arrested for a stabbing, I can't say they definitely did it because we got the DNA. Or we also got a confession. I'm not allowed to say those things. So because, to go to your original question and then I'll take your question. The information that the community has matters a great deal. That trial regarding the guy who falsely claimed to have found survivors in the World Trade Center rubble, one of the toughest things logistically about that case was getting a jury that said they could be fair. And picture it. Picture 6 months after 9/11, when the case is going to trial, the judge says, during jury selection, this happens in every trial. After hearing the summary of the case, do any of you think you'd have difficulty being a fair juror on this case? And every hand went up. And I went up to the judge after the defense attorney, I'm like, you gotta ask that question a different way, Judge, you're gonna be here for weeks. So then he started to say, knowing it's difficult, understanding it's difficult, any of you still think you can't be fair? It's still 2 days to pick a jury. Sometimes it takes a couple hours. But that's asked in every case. So for example, a sex assault trial that gets a lot of media attention, one of the things you'll ask at the start is, how many of you have heard about this case in the media? And disregard everything you've heard in the media, because although the media tries very hard to do the best possible job, the best source of evidence is right here in this court. You're actually going to hear from the witnesses, you're going to see the evidence, you can't consider anything you've read about or heard about online. And during the trial, you're absolutely prohibited from checking anything about the case online. And that's to make sure they're only getting information from sworn testimony witnesses. So the community has an impact, but part of my oath as a prosecutor is to make sure that community pressure one way or another, or political pressure one way or another, never impacts my decisions. So for example, let's assume for a moment I got a call this morning from someone saying, the governor, this is not true, but let's say I got a call saying the governor beat someone up in Boulder. I would not, cannot, should not, must not consider, oh, the governor and I are enemies or friends, or I want to run for governor, or my brother wants to run. None of that can factor in. It's a question of, did the person commit a crime? Do you have evidence to prove that person guilty beyond a reasonable doubt? And always analyze it that way. Never think about political, community, nothing else, other than what is the right thing to do.
So say you do have, like, for example, you said that, like, sexual assault case, right? You have your DNA, and for whatever reason, somehow, some way, it gets recorded or it gets pushed out to the public before trial. Like, do you still have trial, although that information is then public? Do you pick a new jury? Like, how do you go about combating if information is leaked that shouldn't be?
So that's a great question. And it's not always that it could be leaked, but it also could just be learned through publicly available documents. So for example, if you're in the media, you have a right to go to the courthouse and ask the court clerk to look through the court file. You could do that. And it might be in a motion, it might be in an affidavit that's in the court file. So it's not always just leaked, it's also, that happens, but it should never happen, but that happens. But it could be through publicly available documents. So same thing, you'd have to ask the prospective jurors, have you heard anything in the media that's going to bias you one way or the other in this case? So for example, I prosecuted a police officer, I prosecuted a bunch of police officers in my career as prosecutors have an obligation and a duty to do if they commit a crime. Those cases are often covered in the media. You always ask the jurors in advance, can you put aside anything you've heard in the media and make sure you're fair and open-minded about the evidence in this case before we start the trial?
And I was gonna ask, I mean, I've never thought, and I'm not sure who else has seen it, but, you know, it just became very public, so there was a story about a lady who lived on Pearl Street who didn't have a leash no service dog and was smoking in areas she wasn't supposed to. And then there was, like, of course, like a body cam released, you know, like from the officers, you know, for her being like restrained and then put in a chair for like 4 hours. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but that's what the story, you know, they're talking about. I just think it's interesting, and I'm not sure, because I don't know if that those officers have been prosecuted yet, or you know what that whole process has been. But I think a lot now you either see like, you know, police body cam release into the media, and I'm not sure the legality of that in terms of like being media releasing information.
So and I'm happy to answer any questions you have about that incident as well, but let's talk about, because one of the things I want to talk about, and I always talk to Lisa's classes about it, is body cam video, particularly in officer-involved shootings. And it's really interesting, because under the ethical rules, prosecutors have a duty to not only control what they say to the media, but to try to control what law enforcement says. The reason I use the word try is I'm not the boss of law enforcement. I'm the chief law enforcement officer for the jurisdiction, but the sheriff is independently elected and all the chiefs are independent of the DA's office. I don't have authority over them. But every year I send them the documents that you have in front of you. I send those documents to them as a reminder of what they cannot say to the media. So where it becomes interesting is, let's say you have an officer-involved shooting here in Denver. So let's say it happens tonight. You're watching the news and you hear police have shot and killed somebody. It's believed he was unarmed. He's African American. His family's outraged because they say he wasn't doing anything wrong. And there are people gathering at police headquarters to protest. So that's the scenario. Let's say you're the police chief and you have body camera video that would show that the shooting was justified. The guy actually had a gun and pointed the gun at the police. Should you release that body camera video or not? That's an interesting question, right? I mean, on one hand, you want to say yes, because the community has a right to know, the police should be transparent, and the video should go out as quickly as possible, and it will likely quell any community unrest if they see the video. On the other hand, if there's someone that's going to be prosecuted as a result, the ethical rules would seem to indicate that that video should not be released. So it's really, to me, in some ways, a fascinating legal issue to think about what can be released. So a good example would be there was a DA who brought charges against a police officer in Cincinnati. There was a campus police officer who shot and killed a motorist. And the elected district attorney stood up and he showed the video to the media, which I thought was surprising because the case was just starting. And then he said, and I'm going to quote him here, "This is chicken shit police work. This police officer murdered this guy. He murdered this guy." When you think about what's the impact on the public of the elected DA saying that in the press conference. At the same time, you could argue that he's being transparent, that he's letting the community know it's being handled, that he thinks the police officer acted criminally and he's going to approach it. I would suggest to you that there's probably a balance you could strike between remaining completely quiet and yelling the word chicken shit in a press conference, which is, I feel weird saying in this classroom, let alone a press conference. It should never come out of one's mouth when you're a public official. But the technology here, body cameras, makes it really interesting. Another example would be 911 calls, which we now have access to them immediately after they're made. So I've had cases where law enforcement wants to release a 911 recording, so the media wants it. But let's say the call is really horrific. You have a little kid screaming that mom is being killed, for example, by dad. That's going to prejudice the public against that individual's presumption of innocence. So this is by no means settled, it's not perfected, it's a matter of trying to figure out in each case what we can and can't release to the public. And different district attorneys and different members of law enforcement have different views on this. I tend to believe that we should be as careful as possible about protecting the defendant's rights, or the individual who's being investigated, protecting their rights.
Okay, I have a couple more questions, but I don't want to monopolize the time for anybody else.
And I still have questions from the online class, but I wanted to make sure that you get a chance to finish your prepared remarks first.
So I do want to talk a little bit more about the media, since I know this is a communications class and you're thinking about going into it. I think as district attorney, there's great value and purpose in being transparent and being available and accessible to the media and also to the community. Especially at a time where people don't necessarily trust government and may not trust the criminal justice system. I think the more open we are with the press and the more open we are with the community about decisions we make and the outcomes we reach in investigations and cases, the more people have an understanding of what's going on in the district attorney's office. So we have really good working relationships in Boulder and in our office with media throughout the metro area. We try to be very responsive and accessible to them because I recognize that they have an important job to do, and also the more the community knows about what we do, the more trust they would have in the justice system. So when I came in and I said I'm a district attorney, I won't ask you to raise your hand, but I imagine there were a few people here who were like, what is a district attorney, what do you do? And in the community, it's probably even more people who don't know what a district attorney does and our mission of doing justice and what the legal and ethical duties are that we have. So we try to share as much information as we can with the media and also with the public to get the word out about what we're doing. That's important to me not only as a philosophical matter, but on a very practical level. And what I mean by that is, I had a case many years ago. Two guys got into a fist fight at a club. And what happens when people get into a fist fight at a club? What do the other people do? What's that? Well, I would hope stop the fight. That's not what happened. What's that?
Record it.
So record it. This is pre everyone having cell phones.
Sure.
Not to date myself too much here, but not everybody there had cell phones.
Jump in.
Jump in, right? So a couple people did jump in, and what did the other people do?
Cheer.
They watched. Some of them cheered. So we had about 50 or 60 people watching this fight. A couple guys jumped in. And one of the people involved pulled out a handgun and fired 4 or 5 shots. There was, this really does date me. There were 2 guys with a camcorder who were making a music video, just like a casual, it's not like a real production, they just had their little camcorder thing. So part of this is captured on video. You see like the fight, then you see a little bit of chaos, they get blocked for a minute, then you hear the shots and the camera drops. A bouncer in the bar, the club, got shot a number of times in the back. He wasn't involved in the altercation with the gunman, he got shot in the back. He goes down. Everybody runs outside. Outside, one of the bouncer's friends thought he knew who shot the gun, runs up to that guy, punches him in the back of the head. That guy goes down, and he just stomps on his head over and over and over again with his Timberland boots on. Until a police officer who was running down the street in response to the shots grabbed him. Number of cooperative witnesses in the shooting. Do you want to guess? Lisa is right. 0. 0. So 50 or 60 people see the shooting. 0 come forward to cooperate. Number of cooperative witnesses in the stomping of the other guy? 1. It was just the police officer. That's it. The bouncer actually survived. He was not cooperative. So I met with him and I told him why he should cooperate. I told him what the criminal justice system would do. I told him that we'd be able to apprehend the shooter, hold him responsible, secure the right sentence, justice would be done. At the end of all my pitch, I tried to explain to him why he should cooperate. He said, nope, don't worry, I'll take care of it. I said, well, then see, now I'm actually worried. Like, I don't want you to take care of it. I want the justice system to be able to take care of it. And to me, you could say that they were in fear of retaliation. That, I think, is probably partly true. But I also think it's a lack of trust in the criminal justice system. So for many years, I've been passionate about how can we raise the level of trust that people have. And part of it is the media, because so often the information we get, the impressions we have, the perceptions we develop as people comes from whatever media sources we're looking at. So I appreciate those of you that want to go into the media, your commitment to doing excellent work and reporting on the facts and circumstances, whether they're good or bad, but letting the public make determinations as to what happened, because that shapes their impressions of how we're operating as a society. So I've always believed that that's so important for us. So in Boulder, you'll find we actually have 2 daily newspapers in Boulder, the Longmont Times-Call and the Daily Camera. There's also an internet paper. And if a case is of particular interest, we have TV stations come up from Denver to talk to us. But we have 11,000 cases per year in Boulder. So it's not unusual for us to have a fair amount of media requests. We always try to be very transparent and responsive to anyone who posts requests. So the officer-involved shooting example that I touch on is one that really highlights to me the incredible responsibility we have to reach the right result, being transparent as possible, but also when you look at this document that says do not say in the right-hand column, protecting the rights of the accused, and making sure we never cross the line like I believe the elected DA did when he said this is chicken shit police work and this guy's a murderer, because of the impact on the public and the impact on that person's reputation. What other questions do you have?
What's the difference between decriminalization and legalization?
That's a good question. So decriminalization and legalization are 2 terms that are used to describe how the law handles drug cases. Usually it's drug cases, although it could apply to anything. But decriminalization means that it's not necessarily illegal. So if you decriminalize mushrooms in Denver, for example, it means you can't sell them. You can't open a store that says mushroom magic, come on in. But it's not a criminal offense. So it's decriminalized, no one's going to get arrested and prosecuted for it in Denver. Legalization would mean it's now legal conduct that you can engage in, and like marijuana, you'd start to see people selling it, people possessing it, and it would be treated as legal. So it's really, decriminalization in my mind is a half step towards recognizing that it's not something that should be criminalized, but it's not necessarily legal, so you don't have the legal rights that would attach to what's legalized. So marijuana, for example, was legalized You know that, right, Colorado? 2012, marijuana was legalized by an overwhelming vote. It was like 54 to 46%. And now we have more marijuana stores and dispensaries in Colorado than we do Starbucks. It's pretty stunning when you think about it in that respect. It might make you happy. But that being said, that's legalized. So now you have stores, you have people selling it, you have people advertising for it, decriminalized as the city of Denver has done with mushrooms. It means they won't be arrested and prosecuted for it, but it's not legal.
Okay, I have a big question with that, and I'm not sure how much your position has to do with that, but just, there's been a lot of talk about, maybe in our next president, the legalization of weed might become like a nationwide thing. I think it's interesting kind of the conversation on, you're talking about reporting people who were arrested for like offenses of like selling or for just having weed, about letting those people out of jail and kind of fresh communication.
So I have a bunch of thoughts, but I want to make sure I answer your question.
Oh, I guess I just want to know like your opinion on that. I guess for me, because that's something. I guess it's kind of a very like personal question because that's something that affects Black people, people of color, much more. And it's just interesting conversations people have because it is legal in Colorado. But even though it's a really like big business, but it's a business that has, as far as I know, kind of been monopolized by white people.
Okay.
Whereas before that was something that, was only looked at as a Black people of color were part of.
So I can answer some of that. I'm not sure about the racial demographics of owners of marijuana stores. I think you're probably right, to be honest, but I'm not sure that I've ever seen data that reflects the racial makeup of who's owning what marijuana.
Yeah, and I don't know that either, so that's not like fact.
Okay. But I'd like to address some of what you said. We actually launched my office, the first what we call Moving On from Marijuana initiative last year. Because marijuana was legalized, but people still have criminal convictions for marijuana conduct that today would be otherwise legal. So as a matter of fundamental fairness, I believed and determined that it was appropriate for us to launch this initiative that would allow people to vacate their convictions for marijuana possession for conduct that would be legal today. So if you go on our website, you can fill out, not you personally, but if one goes on our website, you can fill out an application and we will help vacate the conviction for a marijuana-related offense so it's no longer on the person's record. And we also asked and secured from the chief judge permission to waive the fee. There's actually a $65 fee that people are supposed to pay to file documents with court. The judge agreed to waive it. I think we should go one step further, and I've been very vocal in this, and I will be vocal in this legislative session that's coming up. We as a state should do that. So we've done it in Boulder, but we should automate it and do it across the entire state. Because it's the one charge in my career, I've been a prosecutor for 22 years. It's the one charge in my career that went from actively prosecuting as a criminal offense to now it's completely legal. There's no other charge like that. And I don't think it should be incumbent upon the individuals who have the convictions to find out about this relief and to petition a court and to pay a $65 fee. So for a lot of people, that's cost prohibitive. I think the state should go back and vacate all those convictions for marijuana conduct. So that's why we started the Moving On from Marijuana initiative. I will say, nationwide, I think we're going to continue to see it legalized. We might cut down on how many people come to Colorado for it. One thing I'd like to see is that, I believe it's due to how much it costs to get into the marijuana business and the taxes and the background checks, but we still have far too much violence around the marijuana trade. Not good business actors, people who don't want to open their own business and get the license and so on. So we just finished a couple months ago a triple homicide where 3 people were killed in a marijuana grow in their house by someone who went in to rob them of their marijuana and money. We have too many cases like that. And there's a lot of people who have invested their lives and their financial future in the marijuana industry. We should allow the banking industry to be available to them. And we should also make sure that we reduce the amount of black market violence because too much of it exists still to this day. Yes.
Just to ask about the decriminalizing thing, for like hard drugs in the future, is there like ever a future where it's gonna even be talked about to decriminalize some of those? And if so, then ideally you'd have people going to methadone clinics and things rather than on the streets.
So will drugs ever be decriminalized? I think there's there are a lot of discussions around that right now, including here in Colorado. I would not be opposed to it as long as we had enough treatment in place for those who have addiction. And so, for example, there was a bill that was introduced at this last legislative session last year, House Bill 1263, that reduced low-level drug possession from a felony to a misdemeanor. And I supported that legislation because I think if someone has a drug addiction or is carrying drugs at a very low level, they should not have felony consequences for that. So I supported it. But what I said to the legislator who introduced the bill, and what I continue to say is, if we're going to treat it as a public health crisis, then you should give the communities the money for treatment. And that bill, that declassified from felony to misdemeanor, had $0 in it for treatment. And although we've reduced the penalty, and I think that's appropriate, and that's why I supported it, you don't reduce the number of addicts, right? So you do that by treatment. So I think for any step where we talk about decriminalizing or legalizing drugs, the first thing we should be talking about is what are we doing for those that are struggling with addiction? Because I think those conversations have to go hand in hand. And until we're able to commit the treatment, and until we're no longer in the bottom 10 in the country for substance abuse treatment available in the community, I think that has to be one of the top priorities for us. Yes?
I have a question from the online class.
All right.
How are people of different races protected by American law? In one of my classes, the teacher would openly mock the Chinese military parade. Is that racial discrimination under the law?
So that's a good question. Thank you for the question. I would say one of the things that we have to distinguish between is hate speech and hate crimes. So there are a whole host of things that are inappropriate and offensive that may not rise to the level of a crime. So what I mean by that is someone could use a racial slur, and unless it rises to the level of criminal harassment, it's not a criminal offense. It's unacceptable, it's offensive, it's immoral. I don't want to be confused here in what I'm saying. It's absolutely wrong. But for criminal charges to attach, there have to be certain elements, we call them, that are met. So for criminal harassment, for example, and we just looked at this in my office for a case that we had come in, but basically it has to be of such a nature that it annoys or alarms the listener. And looking at what it is, and under the current law in Colorado, if it's a racial or ethnic slur, that has a heightened level of alarm just because of how it impacts the person and how offensive it is. So criminal harassment could be a charge that would attach. But there is a difference between the inoffensive comment your uncle might make on Thanksgiving and whether it's an actual hate crime. We've had an increase in hate crimes nationwide, including here in Colorado, since 2016. You can speculate as to why that is, and I'd be happy to answer your question if you want to ask me why I think it is. But since 2016, hate crimes have gone up. So we started a bias and hate crimes initiative in my office last year. So we're out in the community trying to raise awareness. We have great working relationships now with different affected groups. So for example, the LGBTQ community in Boulder is a lot of the advocacy work is done by Out Boulder, which is a group there. And we have a strong working relationship with them, the NAACP, and other groups. And we also have now law enforcement liaisons at each one of the police departments, so that they're more trained and more sensitive to the needs of those communities. So for hate crimes reported, we have a better response.
I have a writing question from one of the online.
Sure.
How vital are excellent written skills to being an attorney or a district attorney? And this person would like to know if you can give an example of the best and or worst written opinion you've seen from a judge that you've worked with, obviously without naming any names.
So writing skills are critically important, but it's something you can learn in law school. I'm going to share with you that when I was in community college, I remember this is too much information, but I'm just going to keep going. I was dating this woman, and she said, "You should become a lawyer." And I was like, "A lawyer? Are you kidding me?" And I thought it would cost way too much money to get through law school. My family didn't have that money. Secretly, I was thinking, there's no way I'm smart enough to go to law school. And both those things were wrong. First of all, you can get loans, as I did. I got $100,000 in loans and paid them back over time. And that's a lot of money. but it's also a small price to pay for a job that you love and to make a difference in the community. And a law degree is really empowering because you can end up fighting for the environment, immigrants, criminal justice, you name it. There's so many different areas that you can go into after law school. So it's definitely worth it. And in law school, they teach you legal writing. So you learn to write differently than you do in college. So I was a different writer in college than I am now. And what I mean by that is anything you write in a legal document has to be cited to or recognize a past case that stands for that proposition. I can't just say, this evidence should come in at trial because it's the right thing to do. I have to say, this evidence should come in at trial because when you look at People v. Castillo, People v. Castleman, People v. Donovan, whatever the case is, that sets the precedent for us under the law to allow this evidence in. So you learn to write in law school. Best and worst, I would say the US Supreme Court justices, some of their writing is absolutely beautiful, and it's just incredible to read. In fact, when I started in law school, I would read some of the sentences and think to myself, what have I just read? I don't even understand it. But then once you learn it, it's like learning a second language in some respects. You realize how incredibly powerful and beautiful their words are. I'd say some of the worst, judges are people like us, I should say. So sometimes they rush things, they don't put enough time in. So at the state level, sometimes you get decisions back where it's kind of jarbled and you don't really understand what the judge is saying, and then you have to work through it. But so I would say just generally speaking, I've seen a lot of good and some bad, but it's stuff you learn during law school. Yes, sir.
This is like kind of immediate, but I remember when the Jesse Smollett thing happened, the Chicago police commissioner said he wishes that the murder cases got like this much attention. And what are the cases that like you prosecute that you don't think get enough attention?
Don't get enough attention? Yeah. So we have 11,000 cases a year. The community probably hears, and we have a great media presence in Boulder because those 2 daily newspapers, they hear about a handful, which is more than you hear about in other communities that don't have a daily newspaper. So I think the community has little idea of how much good work is done day to day in the criminal justice system, just as a matter of course. So if you came down to the courthouse, for example, on any given day, a lot of cases just go the way they should. And nothing crazy happens, nothing dramatic happens, it's not law and order, it's not a case of police misconduct, it's not a case of community concern, it's just cases come in, they handle the right way, and they're resolved. The community probably has little idea of how often that's happening. That makes sense, right? I mean, the system's supposed to work, so you're not necessarily supposed to be there reporting on, hey, it worked again today. But sometimes when you watch the news, all you hear about are the cases that are exceptional, and exceptionally bad in terms of what the defendant did, or exceptionally bad in terms of what the police did, or the prosecution did, or the judge did. So I would say I wish the community had a better understanding of how much the system just works on a regular basis. You know, we had 95,000 cases a year in Manhattan when I was there. 95,000. So I remember one night I was arguing with my brothers about police misconduct. And I said, well, how many of the 95,000 cases do you think had police misconduct? I'm just curious, like how pervasive do you think it is? Is it 1, which is 1 too many? Is it 100? Is it 1,000? Is it 94,000? What do you talk? What's your? And they couldn't give me a number, but they just had their perception that there was a lot of police misconduct. So it's a fair, you could believe that. That's okay to believe. I disagree, but you can believe it. But it's interesting to think about what are we talking about in terms of numbers? Like what are we actually looking at? And it doesn't justify anything. I don't want to be confused here. I'm just saying the system works very, very often, but we need a lot of reform because we need to make it work better for everybody. We have too much, I think, disparate outcomes. We don't have enough justice for everybody. We have people who are scared to come forward because they're either sex assault victims or they have immigration concerns. And in today's climate, they're just scared to come forward. So for example, I think we do a good job in my office on the cases that come to our office, but there's a whole host of people who never report. Like if I asked you guys here, how many of you know someone who's been sexually assaulted? Probably every hand goes up. And the sad thing is if I ask you, how many of those people reported to law enforcement and there was a conviction secured, probably very, very few of your hands go up. And that's where we always want to make sure we're doing outreach to the community, particularly because we're a university town, so we have a lot of college folks there, students there, of course. Make sure that people know what their rights are and that they're going to be supported if they come forward. We have, with my office, we have an immigrant protection program. We go out and talk with immigrants in the community all the time so that they know we will never ask country of origin, legal status of a victim or witness, and we will never report to the federal government. We don't do that. We will not do that. And if you look, I just had a fairly public battle with ICE last week about them deporting someone who we were actively prosecuting before we could finish the case. So getting out in the community, making sure people know that the system works and we're committed to doing the very best we can.
Another online question, but it's about your Facebook page. Apparently, it says on there that you spoke a lot when you were taking office about doing something about the disparity of incarceration of people of color, and they were asking how that's basically how that's going. What's been accomplished so far? What's on the agenda? And that's going to have to be our last question.
So the short answer is we've done a lot, but we have a lot of work to do. And if you want to see a list of the things we've done, it's such an important area for us and for the community. We actually have it on our website, on the Boulder DA website. You can go on there. It's called our commitment to equality, diversity, and inclusivity. And it lists all the things we're doing within the office to have a diverse office, but also all the things we're doing in the justice system to make sure that it's fair and equal for all. So there's a whole host of things we're doing. I'd say the top 2 things that we're doing right now is the implicit bias trainer that we had come into the office. We're about to sign an agreement with him for him to work with our staff throughout 2020. I have all the faith and confidence in the world in the staff, but I think it's really important that we just recognize that implicit bias exists in the system, and that we should do everything we can to make sure it doesn't exist in our office or in our courthouse. And then second, we're doing a deep dive data analysis of all the cases to make sure that our charging decisions, plea offers, sentencing, and so on, are done free of any discrimination. So I'm on this, the third thing I would say actually is I'm on the prison population committee for the state of Colorado as the district attorney representative. And we just visited prisons throughout the state of Colorado, and you can read more about that on the website as well. But this to me is a top priority for us. Is for people to trust the system, which we've talked a lot about today. They have to know that the system works for everybody. And I want to stress, we have a lot of work to do, I know that, but we're committed to it and we're going to keep dedicating ourselves to it. So I know we're out of time.
Students who, you talked about watching the system, is it acceptable for students who are interested to go to the courthouse and just watch how cases unfold? Do they have to sign in or plan to do that?
So the courthouse is open to the public, the Denver courthouse is open to the public as well. This is my email address. So I wanted to let you know we have internships available in the district attorney's office. You should feel free to reach out if you want an internship. The goal of the internship is to help you figure out if you want a career in criminal justice. It doesn't have to be as a prosecutor necessarily. We introduce you to public defenders, judges, police officers, and on any given day at the courthouse, we have trials going. So like last week, it's a great note to finish on actually. So last week we had 2 trials taking place at a felony level. Both cases were sexual assault on a child. So in both these cases, kids have been sexually assaulted by people they know in their family. Since there's a familial relationship between the offender and the victim, the media will not report on it, which I appreciate, because they don't want the victim's name to be known to the public. So I think that's great that the media does that. Don't be confused by what I'm about to say next. But no one in the community has any idea those cases happen. Because I'm not going to say anything about it, because I don't want to reveal the victim's identity. It's a little kid. The media is not reporting on it because it's a familial relationship. But we had 2 different trials going last week with sex assault on a child case. You can come down and watch any trial you want. It doesn't have to be one of those if you find it to be too difficult. But those trials are going on all the time. And we have staff working on those cases all the time. So if you came down to the courthouse, it's open to the public. You don't need an appointment. If you reach out to me in advance, I can tell you what's going on with the particular trials. You could shoot for a day where it'll be more interesting than another day. But I really encourage you to do that because it gives you great insight to just how the system works day in and day out. One of the reporters from the Boulder Daily Camera, which I think is a really good paper, they're at the courthouse pretty much every day just walking around. He knows the system really well as a result. So I'll stick around for a few minutes, but I know our class time is up. So thanks so much for your time today and appreciate the discussion.